Leon Draisaitl ain't here, no bell. We're going back to LA tied at 2 on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Victory Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Sararis. I am one full season into hosting Locked On Oilers. This is my third NHL season with the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm so glad you are making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K, where you can turn any TV into an Xbox, no console needed. Head to amazon.com/Fire TV/Locked On to learn more. So we are going to unpack that absolutely bananas Game 4 overtime victory the Oilers pulled off on Sunday night into the wee hours of Monday morning here on the East Coast. And let me just say, wow. That is the type of experience you have as a sports fan that will never let you come back. And what I mean by that, some people, they adopt hobbies, they casually get into things. You know, you watch one Formula One race every few weeks, you watch golf when there's majors on, or tennis when there's majors on, but those don't consume you. Nights like tonight are how you become an obsessive. And that's where we're going to start our show. Just the feelings, the energy, the momentum. Then we're going to pivot to the game itself a little bit more, talk about the mechanics, some of the sequences, some of the key decisions that the Oilers made throughout the course of this game. And then we'll tie a bow on today's show, talking about where we go from here. So to start, again, I have been saying this for a week now. The series started last Monday, and we're recording this into the wee hours of Monday morning. I have not felt great about the Oilers' performances. The John Klingberg experience has been a roller coaster, to say the least. Every time he's in a puck battle below his own goal line, I feel like the Kings are about to get a dangerous scoring chance. The Kings are a quality hockey team, and by some virtue of their conservatism and their unwillingness to push for that extra goal, they've allowed the Oilers to kind of get their way back into games, to backdoor their way in and hang around. And I really don't know how the Kings keep falling for this trap. You know, it's kind of like Charlie Brown in the football at this point. If you give the Oilers room and let them start attacking in waves off of the rush, even if they're not fast, eventually they're going to break through. And I saw Elliot Friedman tweet it right at the end of the game. From midway through the second period on, this game entirely changed, and the Oilers dramatically played a better game. I want to get this right. After the second period, the Oilers outshot the Kings, including overtimes, 34-13. And for a good stretch of this game, the Oilers were having a miserable time just registering shots on goal. It was not a dangerous exercise, It was an infuriating exercise. The Oilers had 6 shots on goal in the first, 9 in the second. And then you compare that to the scoring chances. They only registered 6 shots on goal, and they had 23 scoring chances, which means 17 of their scoring chances were blocked or missed the net entirely. And then in the second period, they only registered 9 shots on goal. They were credited with 17 scoring chances. So that's telling you more than half of the scoring chances they generated weren't getting to the net. They weren't being registered as shots on goal. And some of that is a testament to the Kings defense. The Kings are a quality defensive team. They do a good job of clogging shooting lanes. I do feel like the Oilers were getting a little frustrated there in the early stretches of this game when they were trailing. It was 2-0 for a while. The Kings scored in the first period. Fogle scored relatively early on into the second. Then they got on the board with a Corey Perry power play goal, which has been important that the Oilers power play has gotten going here. But this was a helter-skelter kind of game. And At one point, I was thinking to myself, and I wrote it down in my notes, this is your series. If you go down 3-1, even if you pull out game 5 in LA, and winning in LA is going to be no easy order, easy task, and the Oilers are going to need to do that if they would like to win this series. But you need to give yourself a puncher's chance. And the better a chance you give yourself, the more likely you are things to break your way. You know why the Oilers deserve to win this game? Because after that second period, they leaned forward and they locked in. When you go and look at the box scores after this game, you will be astonished. You would see that Connor McDavid and Draisaitl both played over 30 minutes in this game. 30 minutes from forwards. And then you go and look at the defenseman minute allocation. Bouchard at 35 minutes, Kulak at 29 minutes, Nurse at 27, Klingberg at 26, Wallman at 25, and then Ty Emerson way down at 8:38. Almost shades of Stu Bickle getting 6 minutes in a triple overtime game for the Rangers. I think that was like 12 or 13 years ago now. But the Oilers had to burn the candle at both ends in this game. Because if you go back to LA down 3-1, you didn't defend home ice, you didn't play great, and you did all that work in game 3. And one of the things I do, which comes from doing conventional journalism, which comes from just covering games, the habit I always had was right before the final period or quarter or half, depending on what sport you're covering, I write my rough outline. I do a headline, a subheading, I do a lead, I pull a few stats, and I start trying to organize my thoughts, because if I'm going to write a column that's on deadline, I like to have it laid out a little bit ahead so I can start to fill in the blanks and color it in as I go along. That way, as the game ends, I have the opportunity, go ask my questions, get my quotes, put it all together, and I can streamline this process. And what I had wrote going into the third period in my notes on my iPad was game 3 the kitchen sink? And I think you saw that from some extent from the Devils in their game 3, where they were down 2-0. They didn't really play well in either of the first 2 games against the Hurricanes, even though they hung around better in the second one. The first one, they kind of just got bullied around. But that's my point here. There was a real possibility that game 3, everything it took going right, you getting that Evander Kane goal, getting the coach's challenge to fail, scoring on the subsequent power play, and then the empty netters, it took a lot going right for the Oilers to win game number 3. And sometimes that's all that is. That's the pop gun, kitchen sink, everything we can do to win just one game, to buy ourselves a little bit of breathing room. And then you go out there in game 4, like the Devils did today, and you just don't have it. And you can overachieve your results or your expectations for a game or two when you're outmatched or being outplayed, kind of like the Devils did. But this game, the Oilers were objectively bad for 2 whole periods. They were hanging around, because I'll credit where it's due. Calvin Pickard was really good tonight. I give a lot of credit to the Oilers' big guns, and we're going to transition to talking a little bit more about the game itself as opposed to the narratives and kind of the big takeaways in a second in our next segment. But coming away from this game, you got to sit here kind of in awe at the performances you saw from Connor, from Leon, from Evan Bouchard. I'll give a lot of credit to Corey Perry tonight, who was very lively. I think Zach Hyman and Vasily Podkolzin were absolute demons on the forecheck, even though they didn't get a lot of run with the team's best players. But the Oilers found a way. And the one fear I did have in overtime, and we'll wrap up this segment on this note, was the way hockey always goes. It's the team that's getting all of the chances in overtime that gives up the stinker, that loses and feels incredibly deflating. And that's what I was worried about. The entire overtime, I was thinking this is going too easy. They're going to they're not going to do this. They can't do this. And they had a million chances. You think about all of the open nets they missed in the course of this game. You think about Frederick's miss, where the puck was behind Darcy Kemper, who was out of position because it took a wicked bounce off the stanchion. You think about the Leon post, the Hyman jam plays at the net front. The Oilers had so many chances, and it would have been so on the nose for what they've been this year for it to just not go their way. But we are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, we are going to dive into some of the key plays and decisions the Oilers made that swung this game in their favor right after this. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in as your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you can stop managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch Money, I realized just how much I was spending on takeout. Now I budget smarter, meal prep, and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even set up long-term financial goals. So if you're ready to take control of your finances, check out Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. One more time, monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDON NHL for half off your first year. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Victory Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. And I can't help but feel like the Oilers stole one again. And after game 3, I was a little giddy. Right now, I am exhausted. I have gotten maybe 10 hours of sleep over the last 2 days between my social calendar and the Oilers playing into the wee hours of the morning in the Eastern time zone. And I feel tremendous. The headache I've had all day is gone. I don't feel dehydrated. If anything, I feel roaring to go. And that's the magic. When Bouch tied this game to get them to overtime, I was levitating. The sound I made in excitement, I could not recreate for you on command because I frankly don't know the sound that came out of me when that happened. And I wanted to say this after Friday's game as well, but it escaped me in my stream of consciousness. That was Saturday's episode. Excuse me. Bouch is having a tremendous series. Yes. I know there are people listening to this saying it's about time he made up for some of the defensive mistakes. He's giving me agita, which I do understand. It can be very frustrating when you know a player who's capable of being great makes mistakes, but you watch the way he played tonight, the amount of minutes he got, how good defensively he was down the backstretch of the third period and in overtime. And at large, I thought the Oilers did a tremendous job defensively in that overtime period of really making the Kings make decisions before they wanted to. I really felt that in that overtime, the way the Oilers were both running their bench and how they were choosing to play stylistically was putting a lot of pressure on the Kings defensively. And the Kings, who have been prosecuting this series, who have been on the attack, who've been running the cycle, who've been aggressively forechecking and really making the Oilers uncomfortable, the Kings were the ones who were getting the red line, dumping it in and going for changes because they'd just been in their own end for 45 seconds. And now look, I'm not going to accuse the Oilers of pulling punches for 2 periods and making this game more difficult than it needed to be, but they absolutely had more juice down the backstretch of this game. If you want to say that's a conscientious effort thing, that the environment being as high stakes as it was, you don't want to be down 3-1 going back to LA, kind of force them to lock in, the college kid who can't get the project done unless it's on deadline, which as someone who was that kid in college, I can attest is an effective motivator. It's due at 11:59. Okay, I'm going to sit down in the library at 7:00 and grind it out. That is an effective mindset. It's not the most efficient or practical, but it does work. And that was the case tonight. Down this backstretch, it felt like Connor and Leon were out there every other shift together. And One thing I really noticed in this game in particular, and definitely during the course of the regular season at various points, and I've definitely talked about this on the show, but one of the real fascinating things to watch is as a player gets older, how do they adapt what they can still do? And you still see glimpses of the fact that Corey Perry won a Hart Trophy 15 years ago, that this was once upon a time a truly elite player. The goal he scores on the power play is a really high-end skill play to take that puck in on your backhand, jam it off the goalie, knowing it'll create a rebound, and then having the positioning to make the play to bash that puck in. And every now and then, Perry shows signs of his age. He can't move or react as fast as he processes. I definitely noticed that he tries to make plays he physically can't anymore. And some of that is just, he's older, he's slower. He has to be more tactile in his movement. But that goal was a glimmer of the player Corey Perry used to be. And he has been invaluable to the Oilers this season at his price point. The amount of offensive production they've gotten from him and not a lot of ice time, someone averaging 13 minutes a night, if that. I would say I'm at a loss for words, but I've already been talking for like 15 minutes and we're going to do another 15 minutes on this edition of Locked On Oilers. But this game was two different games. Through the first 40 minutes, this kind of felt academic, that the Kings were the better team, that they by and large been the better team in this series and controlled play for most of this series. And it was just going to be a matter of them nursing this game over the finish line, going back to LA up 3-1 and looking to put this thing away on Tuesday night. And instead, the Oilers played that third period with the desperation of a team that realized the circumstances. And yes, if you are listening or watching this on Monday morning, it is reasonable of you to ask, where was this intensity and desperation for the first 40 minutes of the game? I do think it's a reasonable critique to say that if you have the capacity to play this well, it shouldn't take being down multiple goals down the backstretch of a third period to make it happen. I don't think that's a particularly crazy request, because your goal is to win these games as simply as possible. And obviously, your opponent is trying to prevent that. There's a give and take. There's a binary here. But you got to give the Oilers credit. And I have been very hard on the Oilers, especially in the second half of this season, for consistently finding ways to lose games they should win, whether it's to good or bad teams. They had a hard time finding ways to win and succumbing to huge momentum swings. And it finally feels like, to some degree, the Oilers have seized a little bit of momentum. And of course, momentum is a nebulous concept. It is an intangible. You cannot feel it. You cannot measure it. But you, as a sports fan, know what momentum looks like. That third period and overtime, one team was playing with juice. One team was playing with a means that was going to create a winning situation. And I'm very happy the Oilers got rewarded for playing their butts off. It would have been so anticlimactic and frankly so upsetting if they were able to mount that furious comeback, tie the game, and then lose in overtime. That would have been a doubly frustrating gut punch. Not only would you have been down 3-1, but you would have wasted all that effort. And I'll tie a bow on this segment here with this thought, which will transition us to our final segment. I don't know how sustainable it is for the Oilers to play Connor and Leon 30 minutes in a game. I know it went to overtime, like 6 minutes to go in the overtime when the game ended, but those guys are going to hit a wall eventually. And right now, you're in survival mode. I get it. I get why you're rolling with Calvin Pickard instead of Stuart Skinner. I don't necessarily get why you're rolling with Trent Frederick over Jeff Skinner, but I think that's a different conversation. But you are going back to LA 2-2. You held serve. You defended home ice. You did it kind of improbably in both cases. Now, how's about you go out there on Tuesday, you steal a game on the road, and you put yourself in a position to close it out in 6. We will be right back on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day, talking about just how the Oilers do that. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no-shell variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days, whether I'm here at my desk working on the show, editing, or doing research, or I just need a quick protein boost. They're a great go-to. Or if you love cracking open every shell for that old-school satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein that provides all 9 essential amino acids. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Game 4 Victory Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. And I saw Revenge of the Sith over the weekend. I was very glad to see that on the big screen. And this is where the fun begins now, because you have stunned the Kings 2 straight times now, where the Kings have outplayed you for good stretches of all 4 of these games. You could dare to say that the Oilers have really only played 2 good periods in this whole series, and they just so happen to be the overtime tonight and the 3rd period of Game 3. Otherwise, the Kings have thoroughly controlled play, and this is a massive but, and the reason this series is 2-2, we go back to gym class theory. I explained this a few weeks ago on the show. I've definitely explained this on Locked On NHL with Hunter Hodes as well. If you line the Oilers and Kings up for ball hockey in gym class, the first 2 picks are Oilers. You're taking Connor and Leon before you consider taking anyone on the Kings. If you wanted to take Adrian Kempe or Kevin Fiala or Quentin Byfield over Evan Bouchard, you could probably make that argument to me. I am taking Evan Bouchard before I'm taking anyone on the Kings. And that's been the deciding factor in this series so far. It's not that the Kings stars are bad. Fiala, Kempe, and Byfield are having a tremendous series. If anything, I would venture to say they've been the best non-McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard players in this series as a whole. But when you are constantly in these situations where it's every 3rd or every 2nd shift is going to be Connor, Leon, Corey Perry, and then either Bouchard and Wallman or Bouchard and Nurse. And I was very glad, and I forgot to mention this in the second segment, I was very glad to see Brett Kulak getting some work with Bouchard in the overtime period and in the 3rd period, because I do feel like those are probably their 2 most consistent defensemen. And the Oilers defense has given me unconscionable amounts of anxiety in this series so far. While John Klingberg has played better in the playoffs than he did in that limited stint during the regular season before he got put on LTIR, he is an absolute adventure in his own end. I mean, Emberson gets 10 minutes in the whole game, 8 minutes in the whole game, in a game that went to overtime. You're effectively riding 3 defensemen you feel reasonably good about, and then some extremely volatile ones. And look, I wish I could tell you the Oilers are definitely going to win this series. I can definitely tell you the Oilers are very much alive. And those are different things. I do feel it's important to say those are 2 different things. Teams that have to survive their playoff series and win wars of attrition, those are the teams that run out of gas in the 2nd or 3rd round. The teams that are able to actively prosecute how they want to play, dictate the game, and go on and win, those are the teams that go on long runs. At this point, the Oilers aren't concerned with long runs. They are very much in survival mode, and that's a good thing. You saw the Oilers in real survival mode in the third period of this game. The penalty kill down the backstretch, really important. Connor, Leon, and Bouchard very much so swung this game in Edmonton's favor. When you go and look at the point totals, Leon had 4, McDavid had 2. And then you go and look at the defenseman, Bouchard had 2 goals. That's the game right there. And we know the Oilers are an extremely top-heavy team. You could make an argument they might be the most top-heavy team in the entire NHL. And I'll be curious. I'll do it tomorrow going into Tuesday for the next episode. But I'll be very curious to look at how the Oilers' big guns minute allocation compares to some of the other teams, how comparable Connor and Leon's minutes are to Nathan McKinnon, Bouchard's are to Cale Makar, Thomas Harley, because I do think there is something to be said for your minutes management and your situational impact, where you're only going to send certain guys out there in certain situations. Again, one of the advantages of home ice, you get to send out guys last after stoppages. You get to put guys in more favorable positions, whether it's a center on their strong side of the ice where they're going to have a better chance of winning the faceoff, or getting the McDavid line out there against maybe the LA fourth line or the Quentin Byfield line, and saying we're going to make Quentin Byfield play defense for his shift and we're going to win our face-off. And I thought down the backstretch of this game was some of the best hockey I've seen the Oilers play all year. And that air of desperation is important, and I do think it coaxed a great performance out of them. But at the same time, it shouldn't take your back being up against the wall to get to that place. And it's why I was banging the drum for the last month of the regular season that the Oilers need to start playing more consistent hockey, because when you get your feet put to the fire, you do get burned occasionally. And the Oilers have survived 2 straight games where they have been down multiple goals. This was the first, if I am to believe the TNT panel, this is the first team to come back from a 2-goal deficit and win in the same game in the playoffs so far this year. And I'm very glad for this team. I'm very happy for Evan Bouchard, frankly. Evan Bouchard is a consistently maligned player for not fitting into a traditional archetype of what a number 1 defenseman looks like. And he had 2 goals tonight. He had the crucial goal that gave the Oilers the lead in Game 3. And he has been the Oilers' 3rd or 4th best player in this series. The one last thing I will say before we wrap up on today's show, I do think the Oilers need to get their bottom 6 a little more work, because in overtime, Podkolzin was out there flying. Podkolzin was out there hitting everything that moved because he hadn't played. I do think the Oilers need to even out their minutes allocation throughout their lineup a little bit better. And ideally, you can do that because you're not down 2 goals in the first period. But look, beggars can't be choosers. If you are doing they can't keep playing this way if they want to win, enjoy the moment. You will talk about these 2 comebacks for a long time. No matter what happens the rest of the season, you will talk about the Evan Bouchard 2-goal game. You will talk about that Evander Kane goaltender interference review for a long time after you think about how this season ultimately ended up regular season-wise, or how far they go in the playoffs. Those 2 games are why you are a hockey fan. But that will do it on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're hungry for a little bit more, be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night. Game Night going after the playoff games at the end of the night, and Locked On NHL the next day to break it all down. I will talk to you guys tomorrow ahead of Game 5, the crucial must-win or can't lose Game 5. I'll see you guys then. And until then, let's go Oilers.